Picking up where we left off, conflicts of interest. Drug agencies should be publicly funded, as user fees create competition between the agencies about becoming the fastest and therefore also the least critical agency. For example, it was a goal in the contract between the Danish Drug Agency and the Ministry of Health to be more attractive to the industry than other agencies. Drummond Rainey believes that user fees are profoundly corrupting and that it is ludicrous to imagine that the FDA could truly work for the public interest if they continued to be paid not to. Divisions in drug agencies that deal with harms of drugs should be separated from the divisions that approve drugs and should have their own authority, enabling them to remove drugs from the market. According to laws of public administration, a person or a body must never come in a position where it evaluates itself. For this reason alone, it's clear that the two functions must be separated. Alistair Wood, whose nomination as the new FDA commissioner was withdrawn in the last minute because he put too much emphasis on drug safety, has noted that when a plane crashes, we don't turn over the investigation to the airline and the air traffic controllers. We get someone else to do it. The Danish Drug Agency understands this and has separated the two functions, but the FDA won't. Since our drugs kill us, drug agencies should be evaluated by how well they handle safety issues. Currently, however, the emphasis is on the speed with which new drugs are being approved. With performance-based salaries to the top executives, for example, the Danish Drug Agency, this incentive is not only perverse, it is lethal. Labeling of drugs. If the drug agency's clients were the people and not the industry, the label on the drugs would look very different. Someone like this, inspired by drug epidemiologist Jerry Avorn. This new drug hasn't been shown any better than currently available drugs, and we know much less about the harms, including the lethal ones, than we do for the old drugs. There is no evidence that its higher price is accompanied by any therapeutic advantage. It's generally safer to take an old drug, as many new drugs come off the market later because of safety problems. Patents should be informed about what the drug does, with the numbers they can understand for both the benefits and the harms. Researchers from Dartmouth showed that if patients are told the facts, they are much better at choosing the better drug and in knowing what the effect is. If people knew that the effect of a sleeping pill is to make them fall asleep 15 minutes faster and could make them dizzy and drowsy the next day, they might be less interested in taking one. And if they also knew that the effect would disappear within 2 weeks if they take it every night, there would be few long-term users. The Dartmouth researchers convinced the FDA's risk Communication Advisory Committee that the agency adopted their suggestions. However, after having thought about it for a year, the Department of Health and Human Services announced it needed at least 3 more years to come to a decision. Of course they do. An initiative that indisputably helps patients to choose much more rationally between drugs, or even to say no to drugs. It's almost like an attack on the state, as it could lead to loss of income for the drug industry. Drug formulary and guideline committees. Drug formulary and guideline committees. Doctors with financial ties to drug companies should not serve on drug or guideline committees, whether in drug agencies, hospitals, specialist societies, or elsewhere. A persistent argument put forward by conflicted doctors and those who use them is that the best people will produce the best decisions and guidelines, and that it's only to be expected that the best people collaborate with the industry for mutual benefit. This argument is amusing, as it is so obviously incorrect. As explained in Chapter 9, people on industry payroll tend to be irrational in their views on drugs and tend to prefer expensive drugs that are not any better than cheaper alternatives. Worse still, when it's discovered that widely used drugs are harmful, these experts are always the last to recommend against them. They find all sorts of excuses for not accepting the new evidence, no matter how strong it is. This was, for example, very clear when it was shown that hormones given to women around menopause are harmful. Unveiled court documents show that Wyeth ran a program of ghostwritten review articles which touted that hormones were good for all sorts of things and which were published in high-impact journals and archives of internal medicine. Excuse me. Okay, back to where we are. We're just gonna go back a little bit. Unveiled court documents show that Wyeth ran a program of ghost-written review articles which touted that hormones were good for all sorts of things and which were published in high-impact journals such as Archives of Internal Medicine, with expert authors who had done very little or nothing to qualify as authors. None of the papers have been retracted, although they are highly misleading. Here are some examples or titles. Is there an association between hormone replacement therapy and breast cancer? Yes. It causes breast cancer. The role of hormone replacement therapy in the prevention of post-menopausal heart disease, there is none, as hormones cause heart disease. The role of hormone replacement therapy in the prevention of Alzheimer's disease, there is none, as hormones increase the risk of getting the disease. Specialist denial of harms abounds everywhere, including in non-drug areas. For example, when it became clear that mammography screening had doubtful benefit, whereas it leads to tremendous harms in terms of overdiagnosis and overtreatment of healthy women. We need people to guide us who are driven by the data and not for hire. Doctors with financial conflicts of interest are not best. They are not even second best. They are those who are skilled methodologists who have some knowledge about the area in question, as they can and are willing to find the flaws in the scientific documentation. The second best are skilled methodologists. The third best could be those specialists on industry payroll who are also skilled methodologists. Many people, particularly those doctors who cash the money, think that declarations about conflicts of interest by some magic will make the problem go away. But as Sheldon Krimsky has noted, we would not permit a judge to have equity in a for-profit prison, even if the judge disclosed it. We would not accept either a judicial proceeding in which the judge was paid by one of the corporate litigants. Doctors are the patient's advocates, and their primary responsibility is to ensure they aren't harmed as expressed in the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. It is therefore untenable that doctors won't accept a court case where the judge is paid by one of the sides, whereas they willingly accept to be paid by the drug industry. Doctors suffer from this delusion to such a degree that it looks like a collective psychosis. When I lecture on this, I therefore sometimes provoke my colleagues in a desperate attempt to wake them up. Judge Smith runs a court case against Cosa Nostra, and before it starts, he declares that he has received travel grants from Silvio Berlusconi, is on the advisory board of the Unmerciful Loan Sharks, has received funds from the Drug Pushers International, has received unrestricted educational grants from La Camorra, is on the Speaker's Bureau for Murder Incorporated. The mob doesn't kill people compared to what the drug industry knowingly does, so why accept money from the industry if you aren't willing to accept money from the mob? According to medical ethicist Carl Elliott, disclosure is an empty ritual designed to ease the consciences of academics unable to wean themselves from the industry payroll. Doctors are grasping at the straw of disclosure of their conflicts because it allows them to have their cake and eat it too. They should ask themselves where they would be willing to have their arrangements generally known, and if so, they should be happy for their information to be shared with their patients in their waiting room, particularly since doctors believe they are immune to industry favors. According to laws of public administration, it cannot be accepted that specialists on advisory committees in drug agencies are paid consultants to the manufacturers, and it therefore defies reason that most such specialists are on industry payroll. It is equally unacceptable that those who, in formulary or guideline writing committees, recommend which drugs to use receive industry money. They often circumvent the problem by hiding it. We studied 45 Danish guidelines from 14 specialty societies from 2010 to 2012 and found that 43 of them, 96%, had one or more authors with a conflict of interest. But only one guideline disclosed any conflict of interest. About half of the authors had ties to drug companies. The U.S. Institute of Medicine issued a report about conflicts of interest in 2009, which called for exclusion of people with conflicts of interest from guideline panels and prohibition of industry funding of guidelines. If, in exceptional cases, it was impossible to find experts who were not conflicted, such people should be excluded from deliberating, drafting, or voting on specific recommendations. I would argue that there should be no exceptional cases if little economic loophole offered to doctors always tends to become very wide. Furthermore, as it is considered very prestigious to be on guideline committees, it should be easy to require that those who wish to be on them should get rid of their financial arrangements with the industry. Finally, about 1/3 of U.S. professors don't collaborate with the industry. So what's the problem? Choose them instead. In France, doctors with the nonprofit organization Formation Independente charged that guidelines issued by the French health authority should be withdrawn because they contravened national law on conflicts of interest and the agency's own international rules. On the authority refused, although, for example, the chairpersons of the working group on type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease had major financial conflicts. Formindep went to court, and the highest administrative court in France ruled that the guidelines must be withdrawn immediately because of potential bias and undeclared conflicts of interest among its authors. I regard this as a great victory for common sense, which is met with so much resistance in healthcare. Drug marketing. There is no need for drug marketing, as the products should speak for themselves. Marketing of drugs is similarly harmful as marketing of tobacco, and it should therefore be banned, just like marketing of tobacco is. What a victory for public health it would be if there would no longer be any ads for drugs, no salespeople, no seeding trials, and no education sponsored by industry. Try to imagine what a world that would be. People would be much healthier and richer. We might never get there, but we can make progress within the system we have. It should be a crime for companies and doctors to participate in seeding trials and other studies of no scientific value, as it is a form of bribery, and sanctions should not be restricted to fines, but should also involve a period of quarantine where doctors and companies are banned from doing clinical research. Drug agencies and research ethic committees, in case the studies are submitted to such committees, currently don't disapprove of such studies, but they should. Drug companies should be prohibited from financing continuing medical education, as the purpose is to sell drugs, and as it's harmful. In the interim, speakers should declare their conflicts of interest and the size of their honorarium, and other benefits from all company-sponsored events within the last 3 years. If it became obligatory to list these in advance program, there would be fewer attendees and fewer events, as it would be easy to identify education whores who are willing to say anything for money. Fines for illegal marketing should be large enough to have a preventative effect. If fines for cheating the tax authorities were far smaller than the revenue from the cheating, there would be little incentive for honest declarations. Danish taxpayers get fined 3 times the amount they cheated for, even though the cheating doesn't harm other people directly, as drugs do. In 1979, a bill in the United States would have allowed judges to fine defendants twice the loss or gain resulting from their crimes. But Senator Edward Kennedy deleted this from the bill after pressure from the corporations. We need legislation that ensures that both companies and top executives' earnings that are based on crimes will be fined at least thrice the gain from the crimes. Currently, the companies see even the large fines in the United States as a marketing cost. To deter bad behavior, the fines would need to be so large that the companies would risk going bankrupt. But this is unlikely to happen. The largest companies earn so much money to their home country that the governments wouldn't dare run such a risk. In 2010, the 10 largest companies sold drugs for $303 billion, which is more than the gross national product for all but the richest 34 countries in the world. U.S. federal law requires that any company found guilty of marketing fraud be automatically excluded from the Medicare and Medicaid. But government prosecutors denied that this exclusion would lead to the collapse of too big to fail Pfizer. Exclusion from the Medicare Medicaid programs has occurred in only a handful of cases, and rarely in cases involving a major pharmaceutical company. Also, in this way, the drug industry resembles other types of organized crime, which in some countries or cities have acquired so much influence on society that they have become too big to fail. Another similarity relates to the behavior at the top, both in the mob and in big pharma. The top bosses prefer to be kept ignorant about the uncomfortable details of the trade as long as the dirty work gets done and ensures a copious flow of money. To bring the crimes to light also outside the United States, we need laws that protect whistleblowers and ensure they get a fair proportion of the fines. Fines of U.S. size would ensure that it is cost effective also in other countries to investigate the crimes and bring them to court. The U.S. Justice Department has estimated that the prosecutions reap more than $15 in recoveries for every $1 spent. We need to avoid the situation that by settling accusations of crimes, the drug companies can pretend they are innocent, claiming they have not been convicted of a crime. By avoiding the verdict, companies furthermore get the advantage that there is no precedent next time they come under attack. Top executives should be held personally accountable for the crimes so that they would need to pay attention to the risk of going to jail when they consider performing or acquiescing in crimes. And we need prison sentences as deterrents. Charges of involuntary manslaughter were raised against Grünenthal, the manufacturer of thalidomide, because the company had withheld data on the horrific harms of this drug. Such charges should be raised against those who, by fraudulent research or marketing, or by withholding data on legal harms of the drugs, cause the deaths of patients, whether they are employed by the industry, by the drug agencies, or elsewhere. If someone kills a pedestrian at a street crossing, through reckless driving, that person goes to jail. No question about it. Compare with the top industry executives who kill many people through reckless and deliberate neglect. The only thing that happens to them is that they get rich. We need to prosecute corporate criminals with at least as much vigor as traditional criminals. And if we did, there might be more white-collar criminals in prison than blue-collar ones. The industry is already prepared for this, as some companies hold the position of vice president responsible for going to jail. This, however, cannot provide immunity for the CEO, as corporate ethics indisputably is determined by that person. In some countries, for example, can you get the buns? In some countries, for example, the United States, drug firms can buy prescription data, allowing them to spy on individual doctors. This is highly unethical, as it is so obviously invites corruption through rewards to high-volume prescribers. It must be banned. We're going to pick up on this later. Food.